The Moon Hoax, or a discovery that the moon has a vast population of human beings, by Richard Adams Locke. Illustrated with a view of the moon, as seen by Lord Rosse's telescope. The cloud still rested on one half of it, insomuch that I could discover nothing in it. But the other appeared to me a vast ocean planted with innumerable islands that were covered with fruits and flowers, and interwoven with 1,000 little shining seas that ran among them. I could see persons dressed in glorious habits, with garlands upon their heads, passing among the trees, lying down by the sides of fountains, or resting on beds of flowers, and could hear a confused harmony of singing birds, falling waters, human voices, and musical instruments. Gladness grew in me upon the discovery of so delightful a scene. I wished for the wings of an eagle, that I might fly away to those happy seats. But the genius told me there was no passage to them except through the gates of death that I saw opening every moment upon the bridge. Addison. New York, William Gowans, 1859, entered according to Act of Congress in the year 1859 by William Gowans in the clerk's office of the District Court of the United States for the Southern District of New York. Advertisement. It appears to be as natural for the human mind to be craving after the wonderful, the mysterious, the marvelous, and the new discoveries as it is for the physical appetite to desire food, drink, and sleep, and thereby as it were constantly attempting to lift up the veil that hides incomprehensibilities from our vision. This interposition was no doubt wisely ordained, for the gazing upon such mysteries might strike us blind and rob us of the little stock of happiness allotted to us while probationers here. May this longing not be the germ of the proof of our immortality? The history of the human race is not only filled with instances of this kind of craving, but it is universal from the loftiest minds as approach nearest the deity, such as Newton, Laplace, and Mrs. Somerville, down to the most untutored savage that roams the forest wilds. Hence the key to the popularity of these charming productions, which fascinate our youth and continue to delight our manhood by letting us into the supposed mysteries of an enchanting fairyland, with a grace of narrative that quite takes us captive, while our curiosity and wonder is raised to the highest pitch in watching the development unfolded and the narratives of these authors, and quite impatient till we learn the result of the plot or discovery. I allude to such productions as The Arabian Nights, Sir Thomas More's Utopia, Bishop Berkeley's Adventures of Signor Guarnicio de Luca, Swift's Gulliver's Travels, Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and Lord Erskine's Armada, besides numerous others of a similar character but of a less celebrated reputation. Among this class of extraordinary fictitious narratives and supposed discovery may be placed the renowned Moon Hoax by Richard Adams Locke. When it first made its appearance from day to day in one of the morning papers, the interest in the discovery was intense, so much so that the circulation of the paper augmented fivefold, and in fact was the means of giving the journal a permanent footing as a daily newspaper. Nor did this multiplied circulation of the paper satisfy the public appetite. The proprietors of the journal had an edition of 60,000 published in pamphlet form, which were sold off in less than 1 month, and of late this pamphlet edition has become so scarce that a single copy was lately sold at the sale of Mr. Haswell's library for $3.75. The book is still in demand. As an instance of this, the following will give some idea of what pains and costs some will go to procure it. I lately had a letter from a gentleman residing in Wisconsin, making inquiry if I had such a book. He further informed me that his attention had been called to my book establishment in consequence of having sent to the Sunday Times, published in this city, the following query: "Can you inform me if such a book can be procured, and if so, whereas the celebrated Moon Hoax?" The answer was that if it could be procured at all, it would be at 85 Center Street, New York. By the circuitous method, this diligent Far West book collector procured his copy of the Moon Hoax to his great satisfaction. August 1, 1859, publisher. Great astronomical discoveries lately made by Sir John Herschel, LL, DFRS, etc., and at the Cape of Good Hope. First published in the New York Sun in August and September 1835, from the supplement to the Edinburgh Journal of Science. In this unusual addition to our journal, we have the happiness of making known to the British public and thence to the whole civilized world recent discoveries in astronomy which will build an imperishable monument to the age in which we live, and confer upon the present generation of the human race a proud distinction through all future time. It has been poetically said that the stars of heaven are the hereditary regalia of man, as the intellectual sovereign of the animal creation. He may now fold the zodiac around him with a loftier consciousness of his mental supremacy. It is impossible to contemplate any great astronomical discovery without feelings closely allied to a sensation of awe, and nearly akin to those with which a departed spirit may be supposed to discover the realities of a future state, bound by the irrevocable laws of nature to the globe on which we live. Creatures close shut up in infinite expanse. It seems like acquiring a fearful supernatural power when any remote mysterious works of the Creator yield tribute to our curiosity. It seems almost a presumptuous usurpation of powers denied us by the divine will, when man, in the pride and confidence of his skill, steps forth far beyond the apparently natural boundary of his privileges, and demands the secrets and familiar fellowship of other worlds. We are assured that when the immortal philosopher to whom mankind is indebted for the thrilling wonders now first made known had at length adjusted his new and stupendous apparatus with a certainty of success, he solemnly paused several hours before he commenced his observations, that he might prepare his own mind for discoveries which he knew would fill the minds of myriads of his fellow men with astonishment and secure his name a bright, if not transcendent, conjunction with that of his venerable father to all posterity. And well might he pause. From the hour the first human pair opened their eyes to the glories of the blue firmament above them, there has been no accession to human knowledge at all comparable in sublime interest to that which he had been the honored agent in supplying. And we are taught to believe that when a work already preparing for the press, in which its discoveries are embodied in detail, shall be laid before the public, they will be found of incomparable importance to some of the grandest operations of civilized life. Well might he pause. He was about to become the sole depository of wondrous secrets which had been hid from the eyes of all men, that had lived since the birth of time. He was about to crown himself with a diadem of knowledge which would give him a conscious preeminence above every individual of his species who then lived, or who had lived in the generations that are passed away. He paused ere he broke the seal of the casket which contained it. To render our enthusiasm intelligible, we will state at once that by means of a telescope of vast dimensions, an entirely new principle, the younger Herschel, as observatory in the southern hemisphere, has already made the most extraordinary discoveries in every planet of our solar system, has discovered planets in other solar systems, has obtained a distinct view of objects in the moon fully equal to that which the unaided eye commands of terrestrial objects at the distance of 100 yards, has affirmatively settled the question whether this satellite be inhabited, and by what order of beings has firmly established a new theory of cometary phenomena and has solved or corrected nearly every leading problem of mathematical astronomy. For our early and almost exclusive information concerning these facts, we are indebted to the devoted friendship of Dr. Andrew Grant, the pupil of the elder, and for several years past the inseparable coadjutor of the younger Herschel, the amanuensis of the latter at the Cape of Good Hope, and the indefatigable superintendent of his telescope during the whole period of its construction and operation. Dr. Grant has been enabled to supply us with intelligence equal in general interest, at least, to that with Dr. Herschel himself, has transmitted to the Royal Society. Indeed, our correspondent assures us that the voluminous documents now before a committee of that institution contain little more than details and mathematical illustrations of the facts communicated to us in his own ample correspondence. For permission to indulge his friendship in communicating this invaluable information to us, Dr. Grant and ourselves are indebted to the magnanimity of Dr. Herschel, who, far above all mercenary considerations, has thus signally honored and rewarded his fellow laborer in the field of science. The engravings of lunar animals and other objects and of the phases of the several planets are accurate copies of drawings taken in the observatory by Herbert Home, Esquire, who accompanied the last powerful series of reflectors from London to the Cape and superintended their erection, and he has thus recorded the proofs of their triumphant success. The engravings of the belts of Jupiter is a reduced copy of an imperial folio drawing by Dr. Herschel himself and contains the results of his latest observation of that planet. The segment of the inner ring of Saturn is from a large drawing by Dr. Grant. We first avail ourselves of the documents which contain a description and history of the instrument by which these stupendous discoveries have been made. A knowledge of the one is essential to the credibility of the other. The younger Herschel's telescope. It is well known that the great reflecting telescope of the late elder Herschel, with an object glass 4 feet in diameter and a tube 40 feet in length, possesses a magnifying power of more than 6,000 times. But a small portion of this power was ever advantageously applied to the nearer astronomical objects, for the deficiency of light from objects so highly magnified rendered them less distinct than when viewed with a power of a third or fourth of this extent. Accordingly, the powers which he generally applied when observing the moon or planets, and with which he made his most interesting discoveries, ranged from 220, 460, 750, and 900 times. Although when inspecting the double and treble fixed stars and the more distant nebulae, he frequently applied the full capacity of his instrument. The law of optics, that an object becomes dim in proportion as it is magnified, seemed from its exemplification in this powerful telescope to form an insuperable boundary to further discoveries in our solar system. Several years, however, prior to the death of this venerable astronomer, he conceived it practicable to construct an improved series of parabolic and spherical reflectors, which, by uniting all the meritorious points in the Gregorian and Newtonian instruments with the highly interesting achromatic discovery of Doland, would to a great degree remove the formidable obstruction. His plan evinced the most profound research in optical science and the most dexterous ingenuity in mechanical contrivance, but accumulating infirmities and eventually death prevented its experimental application. His son, the present Sir John Herschel, who had been nursed and cradled in the observatory and a practical astronomer from his boyhood, was so fully convinced of the value of the theory that he determined upon testing it at whatever cost. Within 2 years of his father's death, he completed his new apparatus and adapted it to the old telescope with nearly perfect success. He found that the magnifying power of 6,000 times when applied to the moon, which was the severest criterion that could be selected, produced under these new reflectors a focal object of exquisite distinctness, free from every achromatic obscurity and containing the highest degree of light which the great speculum could collect from that luminary. The enlargement of the angle of vision which was thus acquired is ascertained by dividing the moon's distance from the observatory by the magnifying power of the instrument, and the former being 240,000 miles, and the latter 6,000 times, leaves a quotient of 40 miles as the apparent distance of that planet from the eye of the observer. Now it is well known that no terrestrial objects can be seen at a greater distance than this with the naked eye, even from the most favorable elevations. The rotundity of the earth prevents a more distant view than this with the most acute natural vision and from the highest eminences. And generally objects seen at this distance are themselves elevated on mountainous ranges. It is not pretended, moreover, that this 40 miles telescopic view of the moon presented its objects with equal distinctness, though it did in equal size to those of this earth so remotely stationed. The elder Herschel had nevertheless demonstrated that with the power of 1,000 times he could discern objects in the satellite of not more than 122 yards in diameter. If therefore the full capability of the instrument had been elicited by a new apparatus of reflectors constructed by his son, it would follow in mathematical ratio that objects could be discerned of not more than 22 yards in diameter. Yet, in either case, they would be seen as mere feeble, shapeless points, with no greater conspicuity than they would exhibit upon earth to the unaided eye at the distance of 40 miles. But although the rotundity of the earth presented no obstruction to a view of these astronomical objects, we believe Sir John Herschel never insisted that he had carried out these extreme powers of the telescope in so full a ratio. The deficiency of light, though greatly economized and concentrated, still maintains some inverse proportion to the magnitude of the focal image. The advance he had made in the knowledge of this planet, though magnificent and sublime, was thus but partial and unsatisfactory. He was, it is true, enabled to confirm some discoveries of former observers, and to confute those of others. The existence of volcanoes discovered by his father and by Schroeder of Berlin, and the changes observed by the latter in the volcano in the Mare Crisium, or Lucid Lake, were corroborated and illustrated, as was also the prevalence of far more extensive volcanic phenomena. The disproportionate height attributed to the lunar mountains was corrected from careful admeasurement, whilst the celebrated conical hills encircling valleys of vast diameter and surrounding the lofty central hills were distinctly perceived. The formation which Professor Fraunhofer uncharitably conjectured to be a lunar fortification, he ascertained to be a tabular buttress of a remarkably pyramidical mountain. Lines which had been whimsically pronounced roads and canals he found to be keen ridges of singularly regular rows of hills, and that which Schroeder imagined to be a great city in the neighborhood of Marius, he determined to be a valley of disjointed rocks scattered in fragments which averaged at least 1,000 yards in diameter. Thus, the general geography of the planet and its grand outlines of cape, continent, mountain, ocean, and island was surveyed with greater particularity and accuracy than by any previous observer, and the striking dissimilarity of many of its local features to any existing on our own globe was clearly demonstrated. The best enlarged maps of that luminary which have been published were constructed from this survey, and neither the astronomer nor the public ventured to hope for any great accession to their developments. The utmost power of the largest telescope in the world had been exerted in a new and felicitous manner to obtain them. And there was no reasonable expectation that a larger one would ever be constructed, or that it could be advantageously used if it were. A law of nature and the finitude of human skill seemed united in inflexible opposition to any further improvement in telescopic science, as applicable to the known planets and satellites of the solar system. For unless the sun could be prevailed upon to extend a more liberal allowance of light to these bodies, and they be induced to transfer it for the generous gratification of our curiosity, what adequate substitute could be obtained? Telescopes do not create light, they cannot even transmit unimpaired that which they receive. That anything further could be derived from human skill in the construction of instruments, the labors of his illustrious predecessors and his own, left the son of Herschel no reason to hope. Huygens, Fontana, Gregory, Newton, Hadley, Bird, Short, Dollond, Herschel, and many others, all practical opticians, had resorted to every material in any wise adapted to the composition either of lenses or reflectors, and had exhausted every law of vision which study had developed and demonstrated. In the construction of his last amazing specula, Sir John Herschel had selected the most approved amalgams that the advanced stage of metallic chemistry had combined, and had watched their growing brightness under the hands of the artificer, with more anxious hope than ever lover watched the eye of his mistress, and had nothing further to expect than they had accomplished. He had the satisfaction to know that if he could leap astride a cannonball and travel upon its wings of fury for the respectable period of several millions of years, he would not obtain a more enlarged view of the distant stars than he could now possess in a few minutes of time, and that it would require an ultra railroad speed of 50 miles an hour for nearly the livelong year to secure him a more favorable inspection of the gentle luminary of night. The interesting question, however, whether this light of the solemn forest, of the treeless desert, and of the deep blue ocean as it rolls, whether this object of the lonely turret of the uplifted eye on the deserted battlefield, and of all the pilgrims of love and hope, of misery and despair, that have journeyed over the hills and valleys of this earth, through all the eras of its unwritten history to those of its present voluminous record, the exciting question whether this observed of all the sons of men, from the days of Eden to those of Edinburgh, be inhabited by beings like ourselves, of consciousness and curiosity, was left for solution to the benevolent index of natural analogy, or to the severe tradition that it is tenanted only by the hoary solitaire whom the criminal code of the nursery had banished thither for collecting fuel on the Sabbath day.